Hello, hello, blissful parents. Michelle Abraham, your host here today. You guys, I am joined by a fabulous guest this morning. I've got relationship expert and coach Mike Stewart with me here today, and he's going to help us really understand our kids and how we can better work with their kids and help our kids understand how their mind works and many other things, I'm sure we'll cover today. But first of all, before I tell you more about Mike, hi, Mike. How are you doing today?
I'm doing excellent. Thank you, Michelle.
Awesome. Well, we were just I guess just sharing with each other before we press recording how early it is where we are. And so I'm so glad Mike is here with us so early in the morning when we're recording this episode. So we are bright and early first thing in the morning for you today. So you're going to get lots of great content and we are still sipping our coffee. So let me tell you a little bit more about Mike. Mike's a relationship coach who loves empowering, educating, and inspiring married women and men to ignite a deeper connection with one another and create a beautiful future. Mike provides tools to create new habits that transform your relationship with your spouse and recapture the magic of your relationship. And your marriage. He has been married for 34 years to his wife Valerie and has an adopted son Lonnie, who is married and has two children of his own. Mike loves to take the challenge he has overcome in his business and personal life and help other married couples create the marriage of their dreams. Mike is also an unpublished author working on his first book that chronicles his journey of leaving his corporate job after 30 years to pursue a career that would make a bigger difference in the world. Mike, I'm all about that too, making a
Mm.
bigger difference in the world, leaving something that is not fulfilling. I remember I was sitting there working in a ski and snowboard company, and I was like, this is great. I help people have vacations and fun on the weekends, but it's not really like making an impact in their lives. And I'm sure relationship coaching for you has been making a huge impact in the lives of the families you've worked with.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's been really fun.
Yeah. So what inspired you to get into relationship coaching?
Well, I realized I wanted to be a coach in 2018. I just didn't know what
Mm-hmm.
coach, and so what I did was I started just looking at how I could help people. In what ways I could help people. I've been a geek all my life, so I help people with their computers and things like that. But I wanted to make a real impact. And that was why I left my corporate job in 2010 because I had this epiphany that I had worked all night on a project installing a phone system, and then nobody cared. Nobody went home and said, Mike installed my phone, it changed my life. And so I started, trying to figure out what I want to do. I was making really good money. And when I went home and told my wife I wanted to change careers, she was like, what do you think? You're crazy, right? But I don't miss that type of work.
Mm-hmm.
And so, being able to make a bigger difference in people's lives is what really matters. Is when at the end of the day, when you go home and you know that you really helped somebody with
Mm-hmm.
something that was important to them,
Mm-hmm.
that's there's no feeling like that.
Oh my gosh, yeah, I can imagine for sure. And it's one of those things too. I feel like parents who, they got married, they've had some time maybe in their relationship, or maybe not very much time in their relationship. I got pregnant on my wedding night, so we didn't have that much time together before kids came along. And then when
Yeah.
kids come along, it kind of like throws a kink in the plans, or in a lovely way, but it also like rearranges the way your relationship is with your
Yeah.
spouse. Yeah. So do you have I'm sure you've worked with parents that have like gone through that and struggled with that. So just before we dive into other stuff, I'd love to just hear some advice around, how to manage your relationship when you have all of a sudden you have kids, when you were not, you were it's the two and now you're more than two.
Well, funny story. My wife and I, a month after we were married, my wife wanted to adopt my
Mhm.
nephew. And so 2 months after we were married, we had a 6-year-old in our home.
Wow. Yeah. So
We
you're
were
right there. You're
immediate,
right there.
we were immediate parents. And I remember going to bed that night, laying in bed, and I'm going, what did we do? We, we don't know how to be parents. We don't know how are we going to do this.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
we,
I think the focus like goes so much on the kids too that like you like, and I hear this all the time. Like when kids finally go off to college, the
yeah,
parents look at each other and sometimes they get divorced because they're like, "Who are you? I haven't seen
yeah,
you in like 10 years, or we haven't
yeah,
spent any time together."
yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Do you have any advice for us to maintain a really healthy relationship with our spouses while trying to navigate parenting together?
Yeah, I think that the best thing to do would be at the beginning of each month, set date nights, one
Hmm.
date night a week, and pre-set up a babysitter or a family member that can come in.
Hmm.
And if you make that immovable,
Hmm.
then that's because like with my IT job, I would sometimes not be, I'd be called to work overtime and things like that, and so my wife and I would sit down and we would set events throughout the month, right? And then my boss would come to me and say, "Hey, I need you to work." She's like, "Nope, I got a thing with my wife, can't
Hmm.
change it." And it's
Right.
set in stone, right?
Right.
And you just don't bend, because what we do is we tend to make kids' activities or their lives more important than our marriage. But
Hmm.
the marriage is the foundation of raising healthy kids, right?
Right.
So if you can keep that communication open and, fight or argue in a healthy way, then you're
Hmm.
really creating a good model for your kids. Because, we get someone told me that you get imprinted from the time that you're a child till 7, 8 years old,
Yeah.
and the behaviors of your parents get imprinted on you, and they're in the back of your mind as you grow up. You just begin to pull from that experience when you start to run into that situation. So it's just really fascinating when you look at it from that standpoint.
Yeah, and you're so right with like taking that time out. My husband and I just luckily my mom took my parents took the kids for I think 3 nights, and it was the first time we were alone, like without kids or anyone else for like more than like 24 hours. And it was
Yeah,
just like, oh wow. Like, yeah, it was nice to like really talk again without being interrupted or without like talking like while you're going out the door or someone's cooking or there's
yeah,
distractions going on. It was
yeah,
actually
yeah,
nice to have a conversation. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I like what you say. So as our parents are thinking about the way that they are communicating with each other and knowing that like the way that they're communicating is what the kids are picking up too. Any suggestions for ways that we can really handle, you know, a disagreement or things like that in a way that's not going to affect our kids in the future?
Well, I mean, when we had a lot of stress in our home, I think my son was 10 at that time. If we would argue and we would fight, and we didn't really have the skills, like I said, we're kind of just dealing with stuff on the way our parents did. Um, but learning a lot about, when you get that icky feeling where you've
Mhm.
said something to your spouse or that you're at odds with your partner, right?
Mhm.
You have that sick feeling, and sometimes we just want to cling that we're right, right? We want to say, I'm right, she's wrong, and I'm going to stand my ground. Well, the problem with that is you could be right and you could be divorced.
Right.
And so when we would fight, we would argue, we would sit down with my son and we would go, we're sorry that you had to hear that. Here's what happened,
Mhm.
without going into too much detail. And now it's gotten to the point where anytime I feel that feeling, I immediately, no matter what, whether how right I was, I will go to my wife and say, I am sorry for my
Mhm.
part.
Mhm.
I can't apologize for her part or whatever, but I can say I'm sorry for my part, and I don't want anything between us.
Right.
And I've noticed if I do that immediately, then there's not that sick feeling or that angst of I'm right, right. I just go, okay, all I can do is own my part, right. So
Mhm.
that's what I do. I just go, honey, I'm sorry for what I said or what I did that caused you to react that way or made you feel that way. I mean, so those are the things that I think is just being open. And we would communicate with my son and let him know, even when we would discipline him, we would come in afterwards and we would say, do you understand why we had to discipline you?
Mhm. Mhm.
Our responsibility is to raise you to be a responsible human being.
Right.
That's the task that we've been given. And we need your help.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, no, those are great. And I think like, just communicating, like above anything else, communicating why
Yeah.
you're doing things or saying things or apologizing. I think it's always good for the kids to see that or
Yeah.
understand what's happening instead of just having an assumption of, oh, I remember it was funny. My brother and I had, like, in our 30s, had a conversation, and I said, "Oh yeah, I remember when mom and dad almost got divorced." And he was like, "What?" He's like, "I don't remember that." And I was like, "Huh?" I'm like, "What do you mean you don't remember that?" And then we talked to my parents about it, and they're like, "We were never close to getting divorced." And I was like, "Did I make that up?" I was like, or maybe that's what
Yeah.
I thought because of the way the
Yeah.
situation was happening or something.
Right.
I don't even know still. But it was one of those things that made me think, well, yeah, I mean, different kids can interpret things different ways.
Hmm.
And when my brother and I have conversations about our childhood all the time, and they're very different, different memories of different things, and even memories of the same thing, but different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very funny. So pivoting into, helping our kids overcome negative thoughts. And so, kids may be experiencing, hearing, fighting, or arguing from the parents. How can we help our kids kind of put their minds at rest and kind of understand how their own mind works, but also how we can, navigate what they've heard or seen?
Yeah. So, I mean, people often tell me, if you could go back and tell yourself as a child, what would you tell yourself? And I would tell myself, let's learn how your mind works. And and so what's interesting is, like 6 years ago, I started meditating, right? And I started really looking at just being quiet and just observing all the thoughts that are bombarding through my mind, right? And then I started realizing how many thoughts were negative about my wife. And so, um, if parents do that, they can actually learn how many negative thoughts they have towards their kids. And these thoughts become unconscious after repetitiveness. It goes into your automatic system, right? And it's the same thing with your kids. I mean, if you could get your kids to sit still and just listen, right? And I know that's hard. It's not an easy task, but I mean, even as an adult, I could sit maybe for a minute still without moving or without letting my mind wander. But the beauty of it is, if you could train your child to sit and just listen to his breathing, and he's going to have all kinds of thoughts bombard him. And so that's the first thing I learned was how many thoughts you have a day, right? But if you could get them to realize they don't have to respond to the thought, they don't have to entertain the thought, you know?
Mhm.
And so I just found that was such a powerful thing, and I wish I knew that as a young
Mhm.
child, and then as a teenager. I mean, having that skill to be able to realize that, hey, that's just a thought. I don't need to.
Don't need to entertain it. Don't need to give it any
Yeah,
attention. Yeah.
yeah. Well, you've seen the iceberg example, right?
Hmm.
I mean, that is a very powerful thing that you can explain to a child, right? Here's what you show on the outside, right? And this is your thoughts, feelings, and actions on the outside. Well, this is below the surface. This is inside you. These are the thoughts, feelings, and that go on inside you. And some of them are yours and some of them aren't.
Hmm.
Because we've all had the experience where I can remember in junior high school, I was playing softball and I dropped a fly ball, and this guy came out and read me the riot act, told me, "You're so stupid. Why can't you catch?" And blah, 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 blah. And I was just like, holy cow, it's just a game. But that experience, I could still remember today and feel the feelings and everything.
Right.
And so, but being able to help them, because if you can get them to analyze their thoughts, then you can get them to understand their feelings because
Mm.
their feelings are coming from those thoughts.
Right.
And one of the things my wife used to do every time my son would come up and ask a question about, like, "Hey, what does this word mean?" And she would go, "Well, what do you think it means?" So you get your child to think, right? And he would say, "Well, I think it means this." And then she would go, "Well, let's go grab the dictionary. Let's go see what the word
Mhm.
says, what that word means," right? And so you begin to train them to not just take for granted what people say, but you begin to train them to go, "Hey, I want to know what that means."
Mm.
And it made my son really inquisitive about things because
I bet. And
Yeah.
now there's a good old Google.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just go
Yeah.
look it up on Google. Yeah,
Yeah.
let's look it up on Google, and it's right there with you.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great way of like getting them to kind of also get engaged with their inquisitiveness too, right?
Mhm.
Um, and having a way to understand how their brain is working and how their mind works. I think it's
Yeah.
pretty powerful if they can understand that when they're younger. Oh my gosh, think of all the things that could happen to them in their teens or
Yeah.
20s that then they can navigate so much more easily, knowing that, oh, this is just
Yeah.
a thought that I don't need to entertain.
Yeah. Well, see, my son's parents were drug addicts too.
Hmm.
And so, he was my nephew. And so he had a lot of questions about his
Hmm.
parents and why they abandoned him and why they didn't want him and things like that. And so we pretty much told him that there's no question you can't answer. There's
Hmm.
no question you can't ask. I'm sorry. There's no question you can't ask us about your parents and what you want to know and things like that. And even as he got later on in his teen years, we would tell him, hey, if you've got a problem, talk. There's nothing you can do that's going to make us angry or reject you or we just want to give you permission to just be open, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And was he able to be open with you guys? Like, did you guys have that?
He was, but one of the things that he had a tendency that he got from one of the I won't say the therapist did it, but the therapist would let him go into the sessions and he would lie. So
Mm.
he was a chronic liar. But we could actually tell. We watched his body language and the tone of his voice. And so we learned when he was lying.
Interesting.
And he actually kept that habit all the way up until I think he was in 1920.
Mm.
And then he had an issue with a girlfriend that he had lied to her about
Mm.
something, and she left him.
Oh, that's one
and he
hard way to learn that lesson.
and he called Valerie up and he said, "Hey, Mom, I understand what you mean, the impact of lying now." But it
Mm.
took him all that time,
Yeah.
even
And
though
a
we
hard
would,
lesson.
yeah, oh yeah, yeah. So
Sometimes we can help our kids learn those lessons early on. Sometimes we can't.
yeah, yeah, oh yeah,
Oh my gosh. So I love your tips for us for keeping kind of peace within the house, like with navigating a relationship with our spouse. So I want to go turn back to a couple of other things that maybe or we can do with our spouses to keep our relationship at a high importance when there's so many other things on a day-to-day that's like schedules and sports and kids and work that is interfering with that relationship. Do you have any other suggestions for us? Because there's so many stories of parents that get to end of high school with their kids leave the house and they're like, "Who are you again?"
yeah. Well, I think the main thing goes back to that schedule.
A
And
connection.
like my mom, I grew up in a single family home, right? My
Mm-hmm.
mom, right? And my mom allowed me to play one sport.
Mm-hmm.
So I was only out of the house maybe twice a week for that, and that was around her schedule. Um, but I think that's part of it is we've gotten to the point where we think our kids need so much social interaction that they're in
Mm-hmm.
3 or 4 different sports. And I mean,
Right.
I have a friend of mine, she takes her grandkids to like 3 different places throughout the week because her daughter's working. And I'm like, it's okay for them to be involved in sports, but what's happened now, I mean, I don't know if this was your situation. I grew up and we all sat at the dinner table together for dinner.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we talked about, hey, how was your day? How was
Yeah.
and that was I love those times. And so we made that a priority. We
Mm-hmm.
made it a priority that I don't care what sport you do or
Right.
what activity you're in, you're actually going to be home for dinner, right? And then having that time together and having that bonding time together. And
Mm-hmm.
then we would also do a family night once a week,
That's a good
where
idea.
we would just we would let my son pick the activities because it would be something we want to make sure it's something he's interested in. But
Mm-hmm.
there was a list of different activities that we could do. So it's really separating that time. And then, my son would go to bed at like 9 o'clock. well, there's 2 hours for my wife and I to spend time
Right.
together, right?
Hmm.
And so, I mean, we could do it just watching TV, or we could, turn off the TV and just sit and talk and spend time together, or cuddle, or, listen to music together. But it's
Hmm.
really just having that one-on-one time, because that's what made your marriage magic when you were first
Hmm.
married, right? Or when
Right.
you were dating, right?
That connection. Hmm.
That connection. Yeah. And so I have a video that I watch twice a year of a friend of mine that he interviewed for an hour everybody at my wedding reception.
No way. That's
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. And so I watched that, and I mean, I just fall in my love with my wife all over.
No, that's so
And I
cool.
keep and I keep these vacation things that we did together, like Carmel by the Sea.
Mhm.
We have Carmel by the Sea up here
Mhm.
on the Central Coast. We would go there when we were dating, and it was just magical. They have a main road that goes down the main street as Ocean Avenue, and then there's shops that go
Mhm.
all little crubbies all throughout the neighborhood, and
That's
it
cool.
was just, yeah. And we had a beach that we would go to that there was nobody at. It was just it was like call
Oh,
it our
nice.
beach.
Yeah.
And it's keeping those things alive, those
Mhm.
memories and those feelings, because that's what, that time together where you guys were by yourselves.
Mm.
Now the kids are important, but
Yeah.
if you could keep that little sacred time that you guys had, even in however you can do it, that
Mhm.
way when the kids, like you said, when the kids grow up and go to college, you still
You still
have
like
that
each other.
bond. Yeah. Well, like my wife and I we're best friends. And my
Mhm.
son actually lived in our at home until he was 21,
Mhm.
because he was a late bloomer. And then we had an opportunity for him to move into a house up in with some buddies up in Reading.
Mhm.
And so we told him we will pay your expenses for 3 months.
Mhm.
After that, you have to get a job. And he did. He called us January 1st and said, "Hey, can you pay my rent?" And we said, "No, you work it out with your roommates." And he did. And he
Yeah.
did. So it's just really but yeah, keeping that time, my wife and I, we made sure that was really important to us, because, you know, letting the kids have the show, or the dictate the schedule,
Mhm.
it creates so much stress in the home,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that those 2 days alone really got us back like a whole year of busyness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this has been awesome, Mike. I'm so happy that you're able to join us today. Do you have any last words for our parents? And I know you have a free gift for them too. Can you share us a little bit about what that is all about?
Yeah, so I have an ebook that it's called Five Steps to Creating a Deeper Connection with Your Partner, and those steps actually equal keeping that connection alive, right? And
Hmm.
communication and keeping it alive. And then the other thing I would say is that give your kids permission, talk to them about things that are going on in the home. I mean, my mom was very quiet, right? My mom would not share anything personal. I mean, I would ask her who she voted for, and she would say it's none of your business. And so I would say that one of the most important things you can do is communicate with your kids your feelings, and
Hmm.
give them permission to communicate their feelings. If they're angry, I want to know you're angry, you know? And so those would be the key things there. And then you can actually go to my website, which is MikeStewartRelationshipCoaching.com,
Hmm.
and fill out the contact form to request the book.
Great.
Or if you
Okay.
like, you could email me at MikeStewartCoaching@gmail.com.
Awesome. That sounds like a great book to help deepen our
Yeah.
relationships with our parent,
I
not
learned the
only with our
hard way.
spouses, but also our kids. Yeah, don't learn the hard way. That's right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here with us, Mike. Any last bit of advice for our parents before we let you go?
No, I think I've shared as much as I have available right now.
All right, perfect. Well, blissful parents, go out there and let's take a challenge this week and try to have some family dinners. Make sure that you're having family dinner every night together with your family and get them to share a little bit about their day. We play a game called the Rose and the Thorn. So it's two
Nice.
roses, and the kids get to say two roses and then one thing that was a thorn for the day. I don't know. It seems to really help
Yeah.
spark conversation in our house. We
Yeah.
don't do it. We don't do it every day, but it's something that's kind of fun that we like to do every once in a while.
Yeah.
Yeah. So blissful parents, go out there, have a fabulous week, and we'll see you again next week. Thanks so much again, Mike. Take care.
Thank you, Michelle. Appreciate it.